education. Okay. Here in Technological University, Singapore, he researches and teaches on multiliteracies, multimodal discourse analysis, and digital learning. He's an editor of Multimodality and Society and an associate editor of Computers and Composition and Designs for Learning. And he is author of the book Designing Learning with Embodied Teaching Perspectives from Multimodality, who will be an honor to edit it with him, and the lead author of this book, Designing Learning of Multimodal Literacy Teaching, Viewing and Representing, published in Knowledge Studies in Multimodality. Well, I think maybe this introduction was not necessary, Victor, but he is presenting today the talk entitled Multimodality in the Language Curriculum. Thanks, Victor. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Mercedes, for the very kind invitation. I really appreciate being here to share some of the ideas that I'm very passionate about. And I'm going to start by first sharing my screen, and let me just do that. Okay, and yes, you are able to see my screen well? Good. I am really grateful to be a part of this discussion. I think it's such a wonderful initiative bringing scholars who shares a common interest in language curriculum together. And I'm going to start, of course, by sharing with you some of the ideas and some of the work that I've been doing in the area of multimodality in relation to the language curriculum. And I look forward to the discussion that you will have with one another, and also to bring it back to the main session as well, and to discuss some questions and reflections that you have with regard to the sharing. I do encourage you to make this session yours. So what it means is to please feel free to put in your questions, your thoughts in the comments, in the chat section of the Zoom interface, and we can turn to them at the end of the session as well. So as I share, please feel free to put in your thoughts or questions on these issues that I'm raising. I have a simple outline. The first is to introduce the notion of designing learning. I think that might be familiar to many of you already, but it's such a core concept across the work that I've been doing that I thought I would just want to spend some time to use it as a frame to talk about the other aspects. The second is to go right into the focus of my presentation, which is about learning with multimodality. I'm going to share about two ways in which multimodality can influence and shape the language curriculum in terms of multimodality for learning and multimodality as learning. I may be preaching to the choir here, but I thought I would just introduce what multimodality is. The way I have approached multimodality really stems from the seminal work that Michael Halliday has done in 1978 in his book, Language as Social Semiotic, where he sees language as one of the semiotic resources that we use to make meaning, to communicate with one another. While Michael Halliday devoted his life to looking at how language works in society, other scholars have moved to look at other modes of meaning making. So most notably, some of you may know Günter Grass, Theo van Leeuwen. So what is a mode, therefore? Well, Günter Grass describes a mode as a socially shaped and a culturally given resource for meaning making. So you will say speech, writing, images, gestures, color, layout as modes, because these are shared resources in which a particular group of people, a particular community would have in terms of making meaning with one another. So there are multimodal texts that we can analyze, picture books, print advertisements, digital text, but there are also multimodal interactions that we can analyze. And I know Mercedes and Vincent have done quite a fair bit of work looking at the teachers' orchestration of various meaning-making resources, or what I call embodied teaching in the classroom. So how they use gestures together with speech, space, and movement to create specific types of learning experiences for the students. Now, if you take a step back and be a little philosophical, you will say that, in fact, all of life is multimodal, isn't it? Even when I'm speaking to you right now, I'm using slides with images. If you can see me, I'm using a bit of my facial expressions and gestures as well in communicating my ideas. But interestingly, a lot of disciplinary knowledge focus on disciplinary knowledge is multimodality, is multimodal essentially. But interestingly, a lot of the way we have approached discipline, in particular schooling, has privileged monomodality, essentially focusing primarily just on the way language is used. But if you think about, well, how science communicates knowledge, if you think about how history or even geography communicates knowledge, really, I mean, the textbooks, the research articles are not just replete with words, but there are images, figures, tables, statistics, symbols used as well. What multimodality is not? Well, I think it's useful to recognize that multimodality, even though it's gaining interest and prominence over the years, is not about diminishing the importance of language. In fact, it's to recognize that language is very much often nested with other semiotic resources. So even in terms of fonts, the use of bolds and italics, different colors in fonts would express meanings as well. Multimodality is not about thinking about non-linguistic modes as para-language, because that seems to suggest that they are secondary, incidental, or they rely on language to make meaning. I think Gunther Kress and Theo van Leeuwen in their work Reading Images have made it very clear that images independently can make meaning without words. And of course, if you have come across wordless picture books as a genre, you will know very powerfully images can propel the narratives without words as well. But what is important in multimodality is to recognize that specific modes contribute differently to meaning making. So words can make some meanings, typological meanings typically, better than images, which will make topological meaning better than words, for instance. Multimodality, well, Gunther Kress will argue that it's not just about thinking language as a semiotic mode, because in fact, he argues that speech and writing can be seen as different modes, and they're very different, isn't it? Speech and writing. Multimodality is not just about the multiple sensory channels as well. Some people would equate that to, the visual perceptions, the auditory perceptions. It's more than that, and it's not about different learning styles. And in fact, the idea of learning styles, catering to different learning styles, has also been debunked within education. So multimodality is not about that, but it's about understanding how communication happens across different ways of meaning making, and paying attention to how these modes work together. Now, if you think about the role of a teacher over the years, it has changed, especially with the affordances of technology in the digital age. There was a time when we think about a teacher as the knowledge authority, the sage on the stage, the person that knows, well, the content, the subject, disciplinary knowledge best, right? He is the knowledge authority in the classroom. But obviously, this idea has been very much challenged with the advent of technology, the internet in particular, right, where information is so easily accessible to students at the tip of their fingertips. And some researchers have suggested that maybe we could see teachers as facilitators of learning rather than knowledge authority. Okay, I'm just going to mute. Okay, good. To see our teachers as facilitators of learning rather than knowledge authority. So rather than to see them as a sage on the stage, to see them as the guide by the side. But I will argue that this this diminishes the role of the teacher. And it doesn't do full justice to the work of a teacher in the classroom. In fact, if you look at the New London Group's manifesto, and I'm going to talk about that later on, they propose that beyond just seeing teachers as knowledge authority or facilitators of learning, it's helpful to see them as designers of learning experiences. And in fact, if you think about, if you have taught in a classroom, you have taught in a course, which I believe many of you have, you'll know that there are some stages in the lesson in which you need to come forth as the knowledge authority. You need to be able to then present knowledge, scaffold the learning for the students, consolidate the learning at the end. But there are certain parts of the lesson in which you take a step back and allow the students to make meaning, to build knowledge amongst themselves, to inquire, to explore. And when to do what depends on you as the designer of learning experiences, recognizing the needs of the students, the profile of the students, as well as the learning outcomes that you have. So I mentioned that the New London Group Manifesto was the one that introduced the notion of pedagogy as design. And from a social semiotic lens, essentially pedagogy is that transposition of social relations from the social world around the school into the classroom as a metaphor of what kind of social relations can be imagined and what the school might prefer. Kress and Solander, Gunther Kress and Stefan Solander argues that everyone engaged in learning, both teachers and students, are designing meanings and they are shaping the social interaction between them through communication. So if you think about the idea of designing learning experiences, the teacher takes on the role of the designer, and like all designers, reflect on the use of material resources, the structures of power in specific environments to best express their meanings. And this has been a very powerful way for me to think about the role of a teacher in the classroom. In the past, when I was exploring embodied teaching, I look at the teacher as a designer of learning experiences, possessing a repertoire of strategies, judging the best way in which the learners can achieve their learning outcomes, and is very mindful about the use of tools and technologies, as well as embodied resources like speech, images, gestures, space, and movement in the classroom, with an awareness of what they can and cannot do. So that was a lens I used to apply to think about multimodal orchestration in the classroom. But really, with generative AI, with more exciting technologies that is made available to students, you will find, and teachers, you will find that the role of the teacher becoming, recognizing the role of the teachers as designers of learning experience have become even more important. And I'm going to share a little bit about that later on. But let me get to the main focus of the session, which is about multimodality and the language curriculum. Now, in the work that I have done, I have reflected on the very many ways in which multimodality is expressed in the curriculum, in our teaching and learning. And I thought it's helpful to think about it in relation to two categories so that we can then begin to contrast the two as well. The first is multimodality for learning. So essentially, it's about thinking about how multimodal resources can be used to support the learning of language, and how multimodal resources is used are used to support a disciplinary learning, the learning of subject content knowledge. Multimodality for language learning is not new. I mean, we have been always doing that in the classroom very much. Graphene talks about how multimodal resources can be used to facilitate language development. And when you think about the learning of language, we think in terms of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And of course, the use of, say, video or posters from students' live work, bring it into classroom to engage the student. It's not terribly new. I mean, we do that all the time because we want to get students excited, we want to activate their schema, we want to engage with them. But what I'm interested in terms of multimodality for language learning goes beyond just using multimodal resources to engage students' learning, but to think about how it can be used strategically and intentionally to deepen the students' learning, especially, for instance, for low progress learners, where they need some of these scaffolds to support their learning for in writing. So on the right, you see an example of a lesson plan where a teacher that we work with in Singapore was thinking about how multimodal resources can be used as a way to support a student's learning of writing of composition. Now, this is common across classroom all over the world, right? The use of multimodality for language learning. And in a multiliteracies project we did in Singapore, where we wanted to look at how teachers were using multimodal resources, and we wanted them to show us an example of a multiliteracies lesson, where almost all of them showed us how they were using multimodal resources to help students to learn language, right? So this is something that is quite common. Beyond the learning of language, multimodal resources can also be used for the learning of subject knowledge, right? So as I mentioned earlier on, disciplinary knowledge as we understand it is multimodal in nature. In the last decade or so, there has been an increasing interest in recognizing how, in understanding how the language used across different genres or different subjects is very different, right? So the language that's used and privileged in a science composition compared to the language that's used in a history or history composition, for instance, is fairly different. But beyond the differences in language, disciplinary literacies also involves understanding how the other multimodal resources can be used differently as well. So multimodality for disciplinary learning involves the use of multimodal resources to support the acquisition of disciplinary knowledge in specific subjects like mathematics, in science. So recognizing how in mathematics, for instance, you're not just working with numbers, you have obviously words, but you have also images, symbols that contain specific ways of expressions. The same goes for science. And scholars have been making headways in relation to understanding how they can be used in the classroom as well, particularly in Asia. I suppose in Spain, I know that Vincent and Mercedes is also looking at this area of EMI classroom for multilingual. So Angel Lin, one of the leading scholars in the field of content language integrated learning, have proposed ways in which multimodal resources can be used strategically as part of helping students to develop disciplinary content knowledge as well. She calls it the multimodalities and textualization cycle. So it's an exciting area to explore, even though it is fairly common, commonly seen in the classroom. I think there's a lot of potential when we think about multimodality for language learning, particularly in the support of low progress learners. How can we then design for meaningful scaffolds using multimodal resources for them to learn the target language, the standard variety of language that is privileged in the school. It's also about recognizing how there are privileged ways in which multimodal meanings are made in the representation of disciplinary knowledge across subjects, and therefore we need to then explore the different pedagogical practices that can use multimodal resources well to learn this subject knowledge. In a forthcoming book that probably will be out early next year, that I edited with a colleague, Jack Pant, we look at how multimodality is used in many English medium of education classroom across Asia. So multimodality is used mainly for language learning, for disciplinary knowledge acquisition, and we have good examples in the Asia context that features this. So the earlier work that I mentioned, where we work with a low progress writing class, is the first chapter of this particular book as well, and it's going to come, I think, early next year. Now, I'm going to move towards the other aspect, which is multimodality as learning, and that is an aspect that I'm really excited about, because this really demands us to think about what we understand literacy is, and what we and what should our language curriculum look like in relation to multimodality. So I will look at there's the concept of multiliteracies and multimodal literacies, and then focus on how then can we recognize and value students' multimodal meaning making in the classrooms. So first, multiliteracies and multimodal literacies. Now, some of you have heard my talk before will recognize this slide. I always use it because, well, if you ever doubt whether academics can change the world, I think this group has shown us that it's possible. It was a group of scholars, linguists, discourse analysts, education researchers, came together in New London in America in 1994, where it takes 2 years for the manifesto to be published in Harvard Education Review. And they were the group who asked themselves a fundamental question way back then, before the turn of the 21st century. They asked themselves, what does it mean to be literate in today's age, in this day and age? What does it mean to be literate? Well, literacy has always been associated with language learning. When we say someone is literate, we say the person is able to read and write. And of course, my colleagues tell me that there has been a dominant paradigm and they had to fight to bring in listening and speaking as part of literacy. Well, the New London group added multis, in fact, 2 multis to literacies. The multi of enormous and significant differences in context and patterns of communication, and the multi of multimodality. The multiliteracies notion set out to address the variability of meaning making in different cultures, social, domain-specific contexts, in part from the characteristic of the new information and communication medium. Now, mind you, this was in 1994. They were thinking about, well, a global village, globalization. They were thinking about, well, the technology, maybe the internet was beginning to emerge, but nothing like the kind of digitality that we are experiencing today. No social media, no mobile devices, no generative AI. And yet they recognize that the world is going to change, right? So they propose a manifesto, multiliteracy, suggesting that we need to expand our understanding of literacy. Well, correspondingly, education systems around the world have also expanded and broadened their understanding of literacy. So in the US, they have a statement recommending the integration of multimodal expression into broader literacy objectives of the curriculum. In Australia, multimodality is incorporated in the state literacy curriculum. In Singapore, which I'm going to talk about, we have a syllabus. Well, we have an English language syllabus that is not just language focused, but involves the learning of multiliteracies as well, the viewing and representing with multimodal text. And guess what? Even in China, in their latest English language standards, they have incorporated the viewing of multimodal text as part of their learning outcomes. So multimodality as learning recognizes that multimodal resources is really very much part of communication. And in fact, language is often, if not always, nested within the wider semiotic. And therefore, as you learn language, you have to recognize the ways the other meaning-making resources work as well. So I'm just going to focus on the Singapore context as an example, because this is where my project took place. We introduced multiliteracies in our English language syllabus 2020 to reflect the expanded notion of literacies. The term is introduced in 2020, but really in the earlier syllabus, in fact, in the 2000 syllabus, the viewing with multimodal text has been introduced, and the representing with multimodal text was then later introduced in the 2010 syllabus. So essentially, they are integrated. Viewing and representing with multimodality are integrated with listening, speaking, reading, and writing to include meaning making across different semiotic modes. And it is supposed to support our students' development of what in Singapore we call 21st century competencies. So this is an example of how it looks like in our curriculum. So as you can see, it's not just a language-focused curriculum, but one that includes the need for students to learn how to analyze how semiotic modes work together, the interplay between semiotic modes, how they're able to combine different resources or semiotic modes together as they speak and represent or write and represent. Multimodal literacy. So I talk about multiliteracies. I'm going to just focus on the aspect of multimodal literacy, which is one aspect of multiliteracies that pertains to the viewing and representing with multimodal text. It's a term that is introduced by Carrie Jewett and Gunter Kress, and Gunter Kress was part of the New London group. After the meetings, they all went on different trajectories, but shared a common vision in terms of multiliteracies. So for Carrie Jewett and Gunter Kress, they developed the notion of multimodal literacy a little bit more in terms of thinking about how image, animated movement, writing, speech, and gestures and gaze are part of the learning that's necessary as we learn the different subjects as well. Theo van Leuven explains or defines multimodal literacies as requiring both texture as well as contextual knowledge, right? That is an understanding of visual grammar, the rules or convention that governs its use in specific context. And this is an excellent and very accessible paper that he wrote for English teachers in Australia, really, thinking about how multimodal literacy or multimodality can be applied to education. In my own work, I have extended it a little further to think about the ways in which we can develop multimodal literacies in students. So how can teachers design learning experiences to build students' multimodal literacies? In the curriculum, necessarily, it involves a certain codification of the knowledge and skills that we want our students to learn. But more than just knowledge and skills, it's also that semiotic awareness that we want our students to have through viewing and representing with multimodal text in contextually appropriate ways. So this book was based on a project that we did in Singapore on multiliteracies, where we work with teachers to co-design lesson packages and then distill some of the learning principles to design for multimodal literacy learning in the classroom. I'll talk about the project later on. But I'm not alone in this. I mean, obviously, you will know that again, all around the world, there have been colleagues that have been doing work in this area as well, including Mercedes and Vincent, doing very interesting work looking at multimodal literacy in digital environment. So over the recent years, there's a growing recognition of the importance of multimodal literacy as part of the literacy curriculum. Now, this is the project that I did in Singapore. It spent over 4 years. It spent actually over the COVID years. Kudos to the teachers really who work with us for persevering. And just to give you a sense of what we did and what we found very quickly. We had, we had 2 phases in the project. It was a design-based research project. The first phase involved us just going to the teachers and asking them to show us a multiliteracies lesson they were doing. Involves us just observing the lesson, talking to the teachers and talking to the students. What we wanted to do essentially was to meet the teachers where they were, understand their perceptions and practices of multiliteracies learning before we decided to share with them certain ways in which you can think about in co-designing the multiliteracies learning experiences with us. If you're interested, we have a report that is out from the first phase. And like I say, I mean, one of the greatest takeaway from this first phase was the recognition that, well, essentially, it was just a lot of multimodality for language learning. Multimodal text was used as a stimulus for reading and writing. So a lot of multimodality for language learning, but less instances of multimodality as literacy learning, right? So less focus on viewing and representing of text. And then we move into phase 2, and then we conducted a workshop with the schools and teachers. We worked with the teachers that were on the project in co-design lesson packages, because we didn't want to approach the teachers by saying, you know, trust us, we are researchers, we know best. But we wanted to value and recognize the kind of knowledge they had about the classroom, and the profile of students they had. So we will propose ideas and we will invite, in fact, we will really encourage them to push back to tell us whether they think it will work for their students, what were the changes they would like to make, and we wanted to have that shared ownership. Well, really, as a design-based research project, we were also interested in developing the confidence and competence of our teachers that work with us as well. So there's a professional learning aspect. So that was what we did in phase 2 of the project. And if you're interested, we have the second report that's out. The report are presented for policymakers, and so they're not academic writing. So it's fairly accessible, and they present the resources from the project as well on how can we design for multimodal literacy learning for students. Working with the teachers and with my research team, we identified the learning processes for multiliteracies. And these learning processes are based on Bill Cope's Emeritus Learning by Design framework, translated in the Singapore classroom as learning processes. And they are exemplified in the lesson packages that we developed with the students. So there are certain principles that we have identified that we think will be useful and core. And well, later on during the discussion, if there's interest, we can come back to talk about some of these principles as well. So we have the lesson packages, and they are all examples of how the learning processes, the principles that we talk about, are demonstrated. These are publicly accessible. The idea is really for Singapore teachers as well as teachers interested in other contexts, like in the UK, to adapt accordingly based on the profiles of learners. So we work with secondary school students, and earlier on you saw the packages for the primary school students as well. And because it was a research project, we also wanted to show the funders that there will have been some learning gains through the process. And then we designed various test examples, or rather we designed various pre and post tests to assess the students' multimodal literacy. So all these are freely available. And of course, if you're interested, we have a project website that can give you more information. Now, I'm going to conclude by talking about the other aspect of multimodality as learning so that we have some time for discussion. So multimodality as learning involves, as I mentioned earlier on, multiliteracies and multimodal literacy. To have it reflected in the language curriculum or the literacy curriculum, but more importantly, to teach it in the classroom as outcomes. Many a times when teachers in Singapore are focused on the teaching of writing and viewing, when they focus on the teaching of reading and viewing tend to be neglected because reading is so privileged. Or when they focus on the teaching of writing and representing, well, writing is privileged and representing tends to be neglected. But our argument through the project really is to draw attention to the importance of building that multimodal literacy, and we wanted to show examples of how it can be taught. Well, but one of the other findings that we had from the project was that we needed to create more opportunities for students' multimodal meaning making during the lesson as well, because that is multimodality as learning. And one of the ways to do that is through digital multimodal composing. Till van Leeuwen described that as new writing, where you're able to compose with the digital tools that is available to you. Studies have reported about how digital multimodal composing can enable students to express their ideas, identities in creative ways, and there have been a number of systematic review looking at the value of digital multimodal composing, which is gaining a fair bit of interest over time. And of course, Yinxue, my PhD student, is doing very cutting-edge work looking at how we can assess digital multimodal composing better in the classroom. So how can we use it to develop multiliteracies, but also to think about how we can assess it beyond the use of conventional rubrics and artifacts. And maybe later on, she can share a little bit about her work as well. One of the things that we found in our work with teachers, again in Singapore, doing digital multimodal composing, is that the kind of guidance and conceptual technical support is crucial. We need to scaffold. So rather than to tell students and teachers that you know, students are digital natives. They are able then to create a video on their own, just set it in the assignment and they will do it. I mean, or to think about it as frivolous activity, it's important for the teachers to be able to scaffold the design of digital multimodal composing. And this draws a lot on the work of Blaine Smith and colleague, who talks about the importance of scaffolding balance as we offer guidance, but also ensure that students exercise agency in their digital multimodal composing processes as well. And obviously, there's a need for culturally appropriate and contextually sensitive approaches to guide students in DMC. This is a paper that I did with Len Unsworth that use digital multimodal composing as a way, or rather, sorry, let me rephrase, they use multimodal composing, because in this case, we were just looking at posters, as a way to reflect the students' learning and how the multiliteracies curriculum in Singapore has been recontextualized across different layers. So what we did was to look at the learning outcomes in the literacy curriculum in Singapore and consider how that has been recontextualized in relation to the professional learning that we offer to the teachers. And then we look at how our professional learning is recontextualized in terms of the kind of pedagogical practices that the teachers eventually enacted in the classroom. And then we look at the students' artifacts and their learning to look at how they actually recontextualize the teacher's pedagogical practice. So different layers of recontextualization is an interesting paper if you're interested. Write to me or you can check it out online. Now, fundamentally, when we talk about valuing students' multimodal meaning making, it's about recognizing and bring their life world literacies into the classroom. And that is something that I have personally been very much invested in my work as well. I mean, Elaine would know that I used to be from Educational Technology Division and Ministry of Education. And one of the things that we are interested in is to think about how technology and the kind of digital composing that students are doing outside of the classroom can have impact on the curriculum and the way in which they are learning as well. So I had a few projects, small studies on this. I talk about multimodal composing, but I'm also interested in digital play. So in one paper, we actually look at the YouTube video production of children. I think in Singapore, I think there was one in America, and another one in the UK, if I'm not wrong. I can't remember, it has been. But we look at their YouTube production and we apply a multimodal analysis to look at the artifacts that they have created. And we talk about the creativity, critical thinking, and semiotic awareness they demonstrated. I worked with a colleague, Wei Ming To, who is an expert in video games. He wrote a book on it. And we analyzed the video game play of young people and to to look at their demonstration of critical thinking, empathy, and multimodal literacy. And I think it's important for us to shift the conversation beyond just thinking about games as something that is frivolous or something that is problematic to one that can actually support certain types of 21st century competencies or learning that we want to develop in our students. So this is the first paper that I talk about that is published in Learning Media and Technology. We explored the implications of student out of school digital multimodal composing, the video YouTube productions, and we applied the multimodal analysis approach to look at that. So these are some videos that the kids did, and then we applied multimodal analysis to demonstrate how actually in the making of in the production of this video, there were instances of creativity, critical thinking, and semiotic awareness. This is the second paper that I talk about. And essentially, we use Think Aloud protocol, interviews, as well as social semiotics to analyze the gameplay video. So thinking about how when they played The Last of Us, as they led us through the gameplay, we can see instances of critical thinking, empathy, and multimodal literacy. Well, and then we realized that, well, if we're going to promote this, especially for younger learners, we need to be responsible, right? And we can't just say that, oh, video games are good and we should it's helpful for learning. We need to think about how parents or caregivers can be involved in guiding the students. We did another interesting study where we look at, again, YouTube videos. But this time is a parent, a father and a child playing Roblox together. So we analyze it again using multimodal analysis. And then we say how through the different gameplay, children are learning through communicating with their parents, through making, through modeling, through teaching their parents, and through leading their parent as well. So in a sense, thinking about how parent and child digital co-play can be helpful for learning in that regard. The other paper that we did during the pandemic was to think a little bit deeper about the differences that social class made in relation to their access to technology. And as long as we think about technology usage for games and for leisure as frivolous, in terms of curriculum and policy, we will never really pay attention to it. And if that happens, the kind of digital divide between the rich and the poor is going to exacerbate, because obviously the well-off will have greater access to subscription quality digital resources. And of course, those in more challenging conditions will have not. And therefore, our paper urges policymakers and curriculum planners to think a little bit more about recognizing the value of digital play, digital learning in the classroom, and how we can then how can we level the playing field in the classroom context. So multimodality and learning, multimodality as learning is about making policy and curriculum reforms to expand the definition of literacy beyond language learning. It also involves researchers working with curriculum developers to systematize the kind of knowledge and skills in age-appropriate, stage-appropriate ways for the curriculum across different levels of learning, because then we are able to then scale it up across the years. It's about embracing the literacy practices from students' life works into the classroom and having the teachers to intentionally create opportunities for students' multimodal meaning making in the classroom. I'm glad to also share with you the book that Mercedes and I have edited that showcase studies from all around the world about how researchers using the multimodal lens have been harnessing the affordances of digital technologies to design learning, to orchestrate different types of learning experiences in the classroom, to design for meaningful learning interactions as well. So this book has just been out for a few months. I think it will be something that may be of interest to you. Now, finally, I would also end off with a call for paper. I introduced the notion of multiliteracies. Now it has been it's coming to 30 years now since multiliteracies, the manifesto, was introduced to the world in 1996. This special issue is an invitation for us to reimagine multiliteracies today in the age of social media, in the age of generative AI. Well, I believe many tenets remain relevant, but there may be changes. There may be aspects that we need to confront and to think about, given the exciting possibilities, but problems that Gen AI and social media offer us. I invite you, this SIG in particular, to consider submitting a paper. You still have a month to do it. A call for proposal is only 500 words. Drop me an email if you're able to do that. So thank you very much. I'm supposed to give you questions, and I have two simple questions for discussion. What does it mean for your work? And also whether you have any points of interest and questions arising. So maybe we can go into our breakout rooms to think about the two questions, and we can come back in 10 minutes time, I think. Mercedes, over to you.
Thank you very much, Victor, for the very rich and interesting and informative talk. We are going to put you guys into breakout rooms to have just some time to gather your thoughts on this topic of multimodality and multimodal literacy. And we'll probably give you around 10 minutes to discuss the two questions that Victor has posed here. What does learning with multimodality or multimodality for learning, multimodality versus learning, meaning for your work, points of interest, and questions arising? Am I right in saying that, Steve, that the Padlet is ready for people to post their comments for the two questions?
Well, Alan, the Padlet we're going to be using for the next presentation. So I think we'll just have a quick discussion in breakout rooms. I can put people into groups of about maybe 5 or 6, and people can discuss Victor's questions like that, and then we can come back and just maybe have a very brief discussion all together, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's have a breakout room for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back for a plenary for another 10 minutes. So yeah, we can do
Okay.
that.
Right, I'm just going to create the breakout rooms now. So please join your room.
Okay, I think that's everybody back. We have about 8 minutes to have a broader discussion about Victor's presentation. So is there any questions or comments in relation to the questions that Victor has proposed, or anything in any general observations?
We have someone. Powell, do you want to share?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank
I'm
you.
just trying to turn my camera on. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for a really interesting and insightful lecture. What we discussed in our breakout room was the meaning of multimodal learning in relation to life more generally, but specifically to teaching and learning. And I guess our conclusion was that one of the biggest things is raising people's awareness of what multimodal communication means, and actually, preparing students for that, and perhaps also increasing their kind of criticality, the things we are getting, the things we are listening or reading, how we can look at these things. Because I think, as the lecturer rightly pointed out, life is very much multimodal. The things we're doing on a daily basis, even, this meeting today is a perfect example of that, right? All of us meeting on Zoom and doing all kinds of things with the chat, with discussions, with the breakout rooms. So yeah, that was sort of the summary of our discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Powell. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Yes, it's very much about raising awareness of multimodal communication. I may go a step further. I remember a conversation I had with Gunther Kress, and I asked him what was the most important concept in the work that he has done on multimodality, and he mentioned the term recognition. I think in addition to raising awareness, we do want the curriculum, the institutions, the schools, the teachers to recognize, and with recognition comes the valuing of multimodal meaning-making practices. Not to see them as just frivolous, good to have, but to see them really as integral. Because if you think about the kind of literacy demands on our young people today in the digital age, it's not just linguistic in nature. It's very multimodal, of course. And the curriculum signals what is valued and what is privileged. And so recognition becomes important. And recognition comes when researchers begin to demonstrate research to show the value, I suppose, the importance of this area of work, right? So, so our research can inform policy and hopefully curriculum and eventually practice in the classroom.
Thank you, Victor. Any other comments or questions?
Anna Maria, is it okay if I put you on the spot? Because I think you shared some really useful, this is from Breakout Room 5, you shared some really useful insights.
Hi.
I'm not sure which insights it was, but what I shared was that I work in initial teacher education, and I in the EALD space and also in the, and for me, I look at I try and include multimodal literacies in the teaching and learning of CLIL. So CLIL is the pedagogy that underpins my units. But the challenges that I face is in my overcrowded curriculum, in initial teacher education, where everything is, sometimes the units or the modules are compressed, and it's trying to find the time to actually do this beautiful rainbow of activities and tasks that you'd like to integrate, but you can't because you don't have the time. Workload implications comes with rewriting units when there's different directives that come your way and you have to make changes. But also because our courses are also in the primary course are completely online as well. We've got on-campus students and also online students. And it's difficult sometimes to make sure that you have that equitable sort of learning opportunity for both cohorts. So they're the challenges that I face in this space.
Yeah, I mean these are real challenges, and these are not unique, I suppose, to just the context, but even in Singapore, which I'm familiar with, I mean, we have a terribly crowded curriculum. I mean, we're always very pressed for time. The way, I guess there's no easy answer to this, I suppose. The way Singapore has responded to it is really through an integrated approach. So as I mentioned, not just the viewing of multimodal text, but it's always coupled with the reading and viewing with multimodal text. I think it signals two things. It signals obviously the first thing where language, as I mentioned, is always nestled with other semiotics, and that is the nature of communication. And the second is to, well, again, highlight the importance of multimodal literacy as part of the learning outcome. I guess we have it a little easier in Singapore because it is in the curriculum. So while, well, the examination is another issue, which obviously privileges language a lot more. But given that it's in the curriculum, the teachers won't feel that they are doing something additional, but they are in fact delivering the curriculum. I guess fundamentally for us as literacy educators, we just have to ask ourselves the big questions on what does it mean to be preparing students to be literate in today's digital age? How and how can we do that, I suppose? So making, yeah. So this may be some ways in which we think about supporting teachers to do that. I don't know what to say to this. I mean, I defer a lot to teachers on the ground because they have practical experiences and they know what works and what cannot work, which is why in our research, we adopted a design-based research approach rather than us going to the teachers to say, try out this strategy, try out this framework. It doesn't work that way because the contexts are different.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat. So from Ying Xue,
Yeah, okay, Ying Xue, my PhD student, we can have a longer discussions about this separately, but I would say that this is something that I think Jia has raised as well. Jia is a colleague from Macau University, and we'll be thinking about the value of positioning them as a continuum. Well, I think you can be more granular in saying that they are. Yeah, I mean, it's really it's really artificial to say that they are different. But in the case of my presentation, I think it serves a purpose to help us recognize the importance of multimodality as learning beyond just multimodality for learning. And I think that then draw attention to the need for us to think about the language curriculum, which is what this SIG is about, and to think about incorporating aspects of that both in the learning outcomes as well as in the pedagogical practices, beyond just thinking about multimodality, always in service of learning language or learning other subjects. So it's an artificial construct, if you like. It's a rhetorical point to draw attention to the importance of multimodal literacy. But maybe with Jia and maybe Ying Xue, you can be involved. We can think of a better better schema to represent it. Yeah.
Hi.
Great.
Hi, Ying Xue, and hi, Victor.
Uh-huh.
Yes, I'm Jia. I'm here, but I can't. My computer doesn't have a camera, so I cannot turn on the video. Yes, I think it's an interest. It would be interesting to look at multimodality as and for learning on a continuum. Actually, in my study, I found that the teachers when they involve multimodality in their classroom, they have different activities that are placing multimodality for and as learning in on a continuum. So I think it will be interesting to further explore this, and I will be interested in discussing with you, Yixue.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Victor, for the fantastic presentation and for everybody's participation. We are going to, if you want to continue the discussion, like Thomas said, you are welcome to continue to comment and contribute your ideas on X. We have a SIG account. You can follow us and continue the conversation there. And so I'll pass on to my colleague, Merche.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Victor. Thank you. Thanks, Helen. Well, now it's time for our second speaker. However, John Macalister. However, John is now at the airport, taking a plane to Singapore, UK, and he has recorded the presentation entitled "In Case of Emergency, Curriculum Studies and Teacher Preparation." Let me introduce John Macalister. Well, he's Emeritus Professor of Applied Linguistics at Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. With Professor Paul Nation, as all of you know, he published a language curriculum design, second edition, and also case studies in language curriculum design, both with Routledge. And in his curriculum work, John draws on experience with projects in diverse contexts such as Kiribati, Cambodia, Saudi Arabia, and also Peru. So now Steve is going to play the video, and then Alan will tell us how we're going to interact and discuss with this the presentation provided by John. Thank you.
Yes, so I hope this is going to work. I have the recording of the presentation here, and I'm just going to try sharing my screen. Can you all see a picture of
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Steve.
I'm gonna play just for a couple of seconds, and you can tell me if everything is okay with the audio and also with the size of the screen. I might need to make it bigger.
I'm hesitating because this is the second time I've reported this, and
sound is good.
Can everybody hear that? Yeah. Okay. Is it on a rather small screen? Would it be? Is it better if I do this, or is it?
Yes. Yeah.
Better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to just play it like that. I think it means I can't see so much of the Zoom meeting, but that's no problem. So I'll press play now, and we'll just watch John's presentation.
slides worked last time. So here goes. Bear with me. So, kia ora, and thank you for the invitation to join you and to present at this webinar. I would very much have liked to have joined you in person, ideally, absolutely in person.
I don't know about you folks, but now I can't hear.
We lost the audio, Steve.
Yeah.
At Changi Airport.
Oh, it's back. It's back.
Yeah. So it wasn't going to work. So bear with me on this presentation, and let's hope it goes well. And I do hope your webinar is a great success. So, in case of emergency, I chose this title for two reasons. One because it's something I've been thinking about quite a bit recently. And secondly, because I think it's something we can probably all relate to, given events in recent years. So in this talk, what I propose to do, and you will be aware of this, I guess, if you've read the abstract, I'm sure you have, is that We will, first of all, consider teacher responses to the global pandemic. When I say teacher responses, I'm over-egging the pudding a little bit. There have been a myriad of responses, and I'm simply drawing on two published case studies. They were case studies that emerged quite early in the piece, and they caught my eye at the time. So I'm considering teacher responses as evidenced by two case studies, and then I'm going to interpret these responses in terms of curriculum. And from that, I'm going to argue for the importance of curriculum studies in teacher preparation. Now, I think one of the things that we probably all remember from the global pandemic was the impact it had on our professional lives. And certainly here in New Zealand, one of the buzzwords that came about was pivot. We were all pivoting. You know, we were pivoting madly. Everything was pivoting. We were pivoting like mad. And so I guess these two case studies are about people trying to pivot. So the first one I want to talk about is this one. It took place in Hong Kong, and it was a case study of secondary teacher of ESL. She was given the pseudonym Grace, and she was an experienced teacher. According to this case study, she responded to the shift to online teaching by resorting to teacher-centered monologue. She didn't use small groups. She seemed to be unaware of the breakout function on Zoom. And for her, what was important was completing the course and preparing the learners for their exams. So this is what was guiding her teaching at that time. Now, you know, to be fair to Grace, it seems from the case study that she may have had a lack of institutional support at the time, but even so, she suffered, shall we say, from inertia, as well as a lack of information. By contrast, somewhere in Central America, there was Oscar. So Oscar was an EFL teacher, a novice teacher, and he appeared to pivot most successfully. For Oscar, establishing rapport between the teacher, between himself and his learners, was an important principle. And he very quickly, possibly even immediately, recognized that the way he'd use kinesthetic activities, by which I guess he means lots of running around and moving, in the physical classroom wasn't going to work in the virtual space. And so in the online environment, where creating rapport was more of a challenge, he did respond by using more small group work to give learners opportunities to interact with themselves and presumably to bond to some extent, and also with himself. So in a nutshell, those are two case studies. And what I'm going to suggest now is that these two case studies they demonstrate how the shift to online teaching how the shift to online teaching differed because of the interaction of different elements of a language curriculum design model. So I guess what I'm saying is that the way that these teachers and all teachers wasn't just random. It wasn't just a result of personality differences or differences in the teaching context and the institution and the support from the institution. It can be explained by a conceptual framework, by a model. And therefore, this model can explain all these behaviors. Because, let's look at it. Because both teachers were in the same situation. It was the arrival of pandemic. Now, using the language of curriculum studies, we can say that this was an environmental factor, something in the situation that affected everybody. And for both teachers, this resulted in that switch to online teaching. And again, using the language of curriculum, we can say that this was a change of the format. So those are the similarities. And then there's some differences. So for Grace, covering the material, passing the exam, this is what were important. And again, using that terminology, we can say that this was her goal, and her goal was really established by teacher belief, perhaps by language teacher cognition. And this in itself is an environmental factor, as I'll explain it a little bit later. By contrast, Oscar valued rapport. And here he was embracing a principle. Now, I would probably go up a level and say that rapport is subsumed under motivation or integrative motivation. But whatever you want to call it, he was valuing a principle and trying to embody this principle in his teaching, which meant using small groups, which was, again, a change of format and presentation, to use that language. And one thing I didn't mention before is he also chose to vary the content by breaking it up into smaller pieces, by having variation in the content. So he was making decisions to change the content and the sequencing of his course. So inevitably, perhaps, and totally unashamedly, the model I'm drawing on here in this talk comes from this book. There are plenty of other models out there, and you may well be familiar with different models, but I'm pretty sure that the language that we use in this book, the language I've just been employing, is either the same as or maps very easily onto the language used by other people who write about curriculum and curriculum design. Okay, so going into our model a bit more, what we have at the very, I should say, it's sometimes known as the Mercedes model, because as you will see in a moment, the design of the model replicates the Mercedes logo in five different ways. If you get bored on the slide after next, then you can spend your time identifying the 5 logos. So at the heart of the Mercedes model is this. Now, this is a visualization, if you like, of the string. And at its heart are the goals. These are the things that we are trying to achieve, as determined, hopefully, by information. Anyway. And around that small circle of goals at the center are those 3 segments. Now, they represent the things that happen in the classroom that support the achieving of the goals. So we've got the content and sequencing. So that's decisions about what to teach and the order in which to teach it. We've got format and presentation. So those are decisions about how to teach something. And we've got decisions around monitoring and assessing. So these are decisions about how we know that learning is happening as we work towards our goals. Now you can perhaps see these little lines extruding from the inner circle. Now these are important lines because they link to other factors. As you can see here. And this is the slide if you're bored to try to count the Mercedes logos. Okay, so we've got these lines and they link to these three outer circles: the environment analysis, the needs analysis, and principles. So so we've already talked about how the knowledge of the pandemic, the arrival of the pandemic in our lives, led in the classroom to format and presentation changes universally, as far as I'm aware. Now, what I want to suggest is that awareness of these three outer circles and their importance in determining what happens in the classroom, the inner circle, is how we can prepare teachers for change, to deal with change. And as we know, there are so many sources of change in our lives, our professional lives. Technology is a major driver of these changes. Maybe I've got time to share a small anecdote from my own teacher preparation a long time ago. And I was trained to be an English teacher in secondary school here in New Zealand. And one of the things we had to come to terms with was educational technology of the time. And I remember one of the things that we were trained to do was use this quite complicated piece of photographic equipment to take a photograph of a picture in a magazine or a newspaper and turn it into a slide that we would then project on a screen in the classroom. I imagine that people who are now the age I was then, would be astounded to think that was cutting edge technology ever. So used to we've become to quickly searching on Google to find an image to pop into a PowerPoint slide and that sort of thing. Copyright be damned. And anyway, so that's a small example of the ongoing change that happens, but there are lots of others. And here are some. Here are some things which explain why everybody needs to be prepared to deal with change. So perhaps it's a new year or a new term, a new week, a new month, depending when you get your new classes of learners. And what will be absolutely certain is that those learners will not be the same as last year's. They won't be, utter copies of last year's students. So this means that we have to draw on information from environment analysis. So one of those segments in environment analysis is the learners. So, what are the learner characteristics? Where do they come from? What are they interested in? What are their first languages? So on and so forth. But also needs analysis, because we can't just assume that the students this year will be at the same proficiency level as the students last year. So we need that information to determine things like our goals in the classroom. So we draw on environment analysis, needs analysis as a result to make decisions about what happens in that inner circle. It might be things like a new course book. Maybe your school or ministry has adopted a new course book, and maybe the underlying methodology is supposed to be TBLT, which is possibly new. So this means that this is an environmental factor affecting the classroom. It's going to affect format and presentation decisions very much, and quite probably monitoring and assessing decisions as well. So in a similar way, a new curriculum can come in. Another top-down change from the environment that has impacts on the classroom. Changes in high stakes final assessment is always going to have an impact, or should always have an impact, on what happens in the classroom. Similarly, changes in language and education policy. The introduction of new technology, I've already talked. An important one, I think, is new research suggesting more effective ways to teach and learn languages. We hope that research informs practice. Perhaps a fond hope, but that's what we hope. And this therefore has to have an impact on what happens in the classroom. And of course, lest we forget, a global pandemic. So there are all these things happening all the time in language education and education generally that teachers have to be accommodating to. And because change is constant, I believe that having a conceptual model to deal with change is a great benefit. Because after all, we're talking here about complex dynamic systems. And it's tricky. We can't just say, oh, I've always done it this way, why should I change? We need to be flexible and adaptable, and to have the tools to be flexible and adaptable. And because of all this change, that's why this model is encased in this final outer circle labeled evaluation. It's a reminder that we should always be taking stock of what we're doing, how well it's going, how things are changing, how we need to change in response to those changes. So, what can we do to prepare people to work in these complex dynamic systems? Well, I think there are three things we can do. The first is to be aware of what teachers can control and change. And very often that means the classroom. Individual teachers have little or no control of what happens outside the classroom. But in the classroom, you can make decisions. And I tend to think that the key area where teachers can control and make changes is around format and presentation. So if you take the example of having a mandated course book, okay, sure, you have to teach that course book. Maybe the content and the sequence even can be predetermined, but you can change how the activities are done in the classroom. There's plenty of research that shows how this can be done with positive benefits for things like learner engagement and of course, language learning. So that ability to make changes in format and presentation, I think, is a key one. Depending on context, teachers can change other things as well. But just that understanding, that visualization of the classroom as that inner circle with those three segments, I think is quite a good way to think about, okay, where can I make change? Where can I intervene? Okay. The second thing that strikes me is that we have to think about what teachers need to know to make changes. And as I've already said, I think that awareness of a model of language curriculum design is a really good starting point, a really good basis. But it can't be, it simply cannot be, it simply is not simply a case of offering a course or a workshop on curriculum design. If the goal is to make teachers feel prepared to deal with change, then the content and the format decisions that support that goal need to work towards that goal. Now, it's widely accepted, sadly, perhaps, that teacher preparation programs don't always succeed in preparing students for the reality of the classroom. And I think that comes down to not being prepared to be agentive in complex dynamic systems. And certainly this was the case we experienced here in New Zealand in my school, where we had a very good, I say so myself, a very good teacher preparation course. But what we found was that the experience of these New Zealand trained novice teachers wasn't always sufficient preparation for them when they found themselves working in, I don't know, a BAAL school in Berlin or something like that, or teaching young learners in Chile. And that made us think about this, you know, how can teachers be empowered to make changes when they find themselves in a context they haven't been prepared for? Seems overwhelming. So our solution in our context was to devise something we call graduate scenarios. And I really want to acknowledge here the leadership, really, and the huge amount of work that Jill Musgrave, my co-author on this chapter, put in. You know, she was the driver for this. I was really riding on her coattails. So graduate scenarios are what we came up with, and you know, they bear similarities to other ideas in the literature, such as this one from Tom Farrell, anticipatory reflection. And our idea really was to think, okay, let's find a way to prepare students for an unknown future. So with permission, we gathered from former graduates accounts of their experiences, positive and negative. And we turned these into problem-solving activities for our current students. For us, the core challenge was how to apply a principled approach that was based on the 4 strands principle that some of you may be familiar with. The 4 strands principle comes from Paul Nation, and it's a principle that I think has enormous power for curriculum development and design. And it draws on theory and research, but in a very practical way, as you would expect from anyone who's familiar with Paul's work. Anyway, so what we were getting the students to think is, okay, here you are, you're in a school where, for example, you know, there's a huge emphasis on grammar translation. How can you change that in some way to allow opportunities for input, for output, for fluency development, for the other aspects of the strands? And what we were trying to do was to help students make sense of a situation that seemed at odds with what they had previously experienced or been prepared for. And the name of our chapter here would join the idea of dissonance and balance. So the idea was that, you know, you're trained in a certain way, you have certain understandings, your cognition, if you like, has been shaped in a certain way, and you go into a teaching context, a teaching situation, and it's totally different. So you've got this dissonance. So how do you restore balance to your life, to make sense of what's happening, and to try and bring together what you've learned with the current situation? And for us, for me, this idea of this conceptual framework is an important part of it. Instead of being overwhelmed, it's like a life raft. And that really is all I am going to say. If you're at all interested in this idea, or what I've been saying, it's actually based on a recently published chapter, which goes into a bit more detail. So you can find it there if you want. These are the references that I've been using or drawing on, just in case you're interested. And finally, I was asked to leave you with a few questions to consider. So these are they. So the first one, well, the first two really relate to those 2 case studies. These 2 might not take very long because you haven't actually read the case studies. You've just heard my very brief takeaway from them both. So, you know, to what extent do you agree with my analysis of the 2 case studies? And perhaps there I'm talking more about my analysis in terms of curriculum. And if you're familiar with a different model of curriculum design, would your analysis be similar, or would you be looking at different things? And the second two questions, the final two, invite you to consider more your own experience in different things. The first one is, consider how you, your colleagues, your institution responded to the global pandemic. How would you interpret that response in curriculum design terms? I'm sure, unless you're extremely fortunate, you probably weren't in a place where the response was as good as it could have been. So you might have some interesting thoughts there. And finally, how might curriculum studies be incorporated into teacher preparation courses in your context as a means of preparing teachers to respond to changes? Because the example I gave you about graduate scenarios was very particular to our context. Would it work for you? Would it be something different? Would you have other ideas? Do you already have ideas? So I hope those are a few things for you to think about. And at this point, I will, number one, hope that this time the recording worked properly as I intended. And on the assumption it did, I shall now go and board my plane. So enjoy this your day, and thank you very much. Bye.
Okay, so that's John's talk. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. My colleague Steve will now put you into breakout room. But before we do that, let me just send you the link to John's questions with the Padlet link. Oh, and Steve already did that. Okay, these two are essentially the same links. One is shorter, and so if you click on the link, it will take you to the Padlet page with the 4 questions that John has posed. So we have about 10 minutes for a quick discussion, and then we'll come back and perhaps have an open discussion about this presentation. I think that's all I have to say. Yeah.
Okay, it should be possible for you to join your rooms, so please do that.
Is there any comments? I thought I saw one, but it's gone now. You're on mute, Steve.
Sorry. I don't see anything in the Padlet, but maybe people would like to add something now. I don't know. I'll just share it so that we can all see the questions at least.
Yeah, we can always just have an open discussion as well.
Yeah,
it's easier.
I think a number of people had to leave, so we're a smaller group now, so it might be easier to just have an open discussion if anybody wants to make any comments. So
oh, we only have 9 people now. It was 20 before the breakout room. Okay, yeah, I think it's probably easier to just have a chat, have an open discussion for 5 minutes or so. Is there any comments or observations from John's presentation?
So can I just say that with BAAL, we mainly talked about the third question about the response to the pandemic in our context and how we quickly adapted to the challenges and how we quickly created opportunities to make changes to the enacted curriculum, the taught curriculum, the learned curriculum. But then when we went back to, say, in-person mode, how quickly we were told in some cases to just, leave all that behind, forget about all that. And we pretty much went back to pre-pandemic times and online experiences became an add-on or complementary thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that kind of links to his idea of being agile and being flexible, because there are so many uncertainties. I know certainly in my institution, it's online, hybrid, and then online again, and then hybrid, and then face-to-face. There's so many different kind of modes of curriculum design, and we had to record and then deliver online, sometimes both. We have to do both at the same time. So it's really, really challenging for teachers, I would say. And thanks, Dario. Do we have another question? I think someone raised their hands.
Yes, Tony, I think it was you who raised your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Mercedes. And I'd like to thank John, if you were here, for an excellent presentation. Thank you, very interesting. So yeah, we at Manchester Metropolitan University had a similar experience to Alan, with backwards and forwards with online, face-to-face, some kind of hybrid during the pandemics. And whilst I think we reacted to it okay, I don't think we did as well as apparently the Pakistani government. Naima was saying they managed to give out portable devices to many people, many students there. So they reacted very well. We got Teams, Microsoft Teams in very quickly so that we could deliver our online provision. It seemed to go okay, but the training was a bit haphazard. So some people dealt with it a bit better than others. But in our group, we focused on the fourth question, actually, how can curriculum studies be incorporated into teacher preparation courses? And because we are a provider of the Trinity Cert TESOL, I don't imagine there's much space in our curriculum for things like this, and of course many other things, including some important issues in social awareness and justice in language education. We have to focus on the core skills. However, this is an important area, and I do think that institutions should take responsibility and have some kind of backup plan about what they're going to do in the case of sudden change, and make the teachers aware of them. That's my thoughts anyway.
Thank you. Any comments?
Well, I agree, Tony, completely agree, but we only have the lack of time, okay, to increase the programs, okay, add more content on the prep courses for our teachers. I don't know how we could solve this, because we don't know when we're gonna have another, need another response to a big change. Nowadays, we don't know, it's quite uncertain what's gonna happen. I don't know how we could approach this without, working on too extensive programs, but for sure we have to do something. I don't know, maybe kind of, networking, collaborative work, sharing experiences, but working effectively. I don't know. I'm not pretty sure, to be honest. But not a great contribution from my part on this point, but just concerns about this.
Yeah, I certainly think the sorry, you haven't. Yeah, feel free to just speak. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, my name's Tony. It's not TESOL committee. I can't change that. Please call me Tony. So I was just thinking, whilst Mercedes raised those very good points there, perhaps it's up to groups like this one to come up with some kind of guidelines or recommendations for what to do for a sudden quick change, and perhaps put together some kind of video training for how to adapt to online teaching for various levels or age groups. And that way, any school can perhaps access those recordings and help to train their teachers quite quickly to adapt to any changes.
Thank you, Tony. One last question from Nima.
Thank you. So just a suggestion, really. the UK government, for those of us on this call who are in the UK or working in a UK context, the UK government is consulting on the curriculum and assessment. There's a big review going on and it's online. I'm not good at posting links in chat, otherwise I'd have done that right now. So here's our opportunity to say, look, we need to, this is what we can do. And I think I've heard a lot of good suggestions and even practices in the 2 hours today. So it's a great opportunity to make our suggestions there.
Yeah,
But thank you so much. Great 2 hours. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. In Scotland, we're in a similar situation. The Education Scotland is also undertaking a curriculum review, including for modern languages. So that's really good point. So with that, I'm going to pass on to Dario.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, colleagues, and for your comments, for joining us today, for coming to this autumn webinar 2024. And I'm going to share the link to our website. So further down the road this month, we will be sharing the recording and John's talk. And you can use the forum function that we have there if you would like to maybe extend the conversation and send something that you would like to share with the curriculum sphere, if you will. And that's all from us, I guess. Happy Friday, happy weekend, happy everything, and see you all soon. Bye for now.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
Bye.